Think you know the Mongol Empire? Spoiler, most of what you've heard is either half true or completely wrong. Let's bust 5 myths that might just blow your mind. Number 1. Genghis Khan was just a bloodthirsty warlord. When most people think of Genghis Khan, they picture a terrifying figure on horseback, sweeping across continents with unstoppable force, burning cities, and leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. And sure, he definitely knew how to win a war, but to call him just a bloodthirsty tyrant? That's seriously oversimplifying things. Genghis Khan wasn't just swinging swords and screaming war cries all day. His campaigns were ruthless, yes, but they were also brilliantly strategic. He didn't just rely on brute force, he mastered psychological warfare, used intelligence networks that would make modern spy agencies jealous, and planned military maneuvers with incredible precision. For example, he often staged fake retreats to lure enemy forces into deadly traps. That's not just muscle, that's 4D chess on horseback. But here's where the story gets more surprising. Genghis Khan was actually all about building things too, like one of the largest free trade zones the world had ever seen. Under his rule, the Silk Road was not only revived, but protected. Traders, scientists, and even religious leaders from different cultures could move safely across the empire. The Mongol postal system was so efficient, it could rival Amazon Prime. Just, with horses instead of drones. And about those cities he conquered? If they surrendered peacefully, Genghis would often spare them and even promote their leaders. He was surprisingly pragmatic. Skilled people, artisans, engineers, doctors, weren't slaughtered. They were recruited. His armies were like the ultimate international work team, a mix of Persians, Chinese, Turks, and yes, Mongols. It wasn't just about conquest, it was about control, trade, and yes, running a pretty solid empire. Number 2, the Mongols were more than just horseback archers. When people imagine the Mongol army, they usually picture this: unstoppable waves of warriors thundering across the steppe, firing arrows while riding at full speed, basically turning medieval warfare into an extreme sport. And yeah, that image is partly true. Mongol cavalry was terrifyingly effective, but to think their success was just about fast horses and sharpshooting? That's missing half the story. Sure, the Mongols' horseback archery was legendary. They trained from childhood to shoot with deadly accuracy while galloping at top speed, which already put them light years ahead of most armies that fought on foot. But here's the thing. Genghis Khan didn't just win battles because he was faster. He won because he was smarter. The Mongols were masters of siege warfare, which is honestly something most people don't expect from a nomadic society. They didn't just charge at fortified cities hoping the gates would fall. They studied how to break them. They captured engineers from China and the Middle East, who were skilled in building siege weapons like catapults and trebuchets, and they used this knowledge to take down some of the most heavily defended cities of the time. And let's not forget about their spies and psychological games. The Mongols were experts at spreading terror long before they even arrived on the battlefield. They would send advanced scouts to create panic, spread terrifying rumors, and convince enemy towns to surrender without even fighting. Some cities would give up just from hearing that the Mongols were on their way. They also used complex military signals, multi-pronged attacks, and faked retreats to confuse and dismantle their enemies. If you thought they just galloped in and started shooting, you're seriously underestimating how calculated they were. Number 3, the Mongols drink horse blood every day. One of the most popular, and let's be honest, pretty hardcore, images of the Mongols is that they regularly drank horse blood to survive. It paints this picture of a brutal, survivalist culture that was willing to literally bleed their own horses to keep moving. Sounds wild, right? Well, here's the thing. It's not completely false, but the story gets a little exaggerated. Yes, Mongol warriors were known to occasionally drink horse blood, but it wasn't part of their daily diet. They weren't just strolling around the steppe with a horse blood latte. This was strictly a survival tactic used in extreme circumstances, like when they were stranded without food in the middle of a long military campaign. In fact, the Mongols were actually brilliant when it came to self-sufficiency on the road. They packed dried meat, fermented mare's milk called kumis, and small portable rations like milk curd. They had developed efficient ways to travel light, but still have enough fuel to keep moving fast. The whole horse blood thing was like their version of a last-ditch emergency protein shake. Desperate times, desperate measures. Also, fun fact, they could drink a small amount of blood from a horse without killing it. They would make a small cut in the jugular vein, collect the blood, and the animal would survive and continue traveling with them. These horses were basically the Mongol version of a multi-tool: transport, milk, and in extreme cases, a backup energy drink. But no, the Mongols weren't some sort of everyday vampire cavalry. Most of the time, they were enjoying high-protein travel snacks, sipping fermented milk, and only resorting to horse blood when absolutely necessary. Number 4. The Mongols were just nomads with no cities. Let's bust this one wide open. There's this super common belief that the Mongols were purely nomadic, galloping endlessly across the steppes with no interest in building cities, infrastructure, or permanent settlements. Basically, people imagine them as history's ultimate road trippers. No home, no cities, just horses, yurts, and wide open skies. But here's the truth. The Mongols knew exactly how to build, manage, and grow urban centers. They just don't get enough credit for it. Sure, the Mongol lifestyle was deeply rooted in nomadism. That's where their strength came from. But as their empire expanded, they didn't just flatten cities. They built them. One of the best examples? Karakoram, the capital of the Mongol Empire. This wasn't just a random camp. It was a legit, bustling city. They had artisans, foreign traders, religious temples from multiple faiths, and even a silver tree that dispensed drinks, basically the medieval version of a flex. This city became a political and cultural hub where merchants, diplomats, and scholars from all over the empire gathered. And, as we said earlier, let's not forget that the Mongols were all about the Silk Road. They heavily promoted trade by protecting the routes, improving roads, and building relay stations called yam posts, where travelers and messengers could rest and resupply. So not only did they support urban centers, they actually connected them like never before. Oh, and despite being nomads, they loved tech and knowledge. They brought in architects, scientists, and engineers from across the empire to build better cities and create infrastructure. Mongol rulers, especially Kublai Khan, actively developed cities in China and supported public works like canals, roads, and granaries. So yeah, they did ride horses and live in yurts, but the Mongol Empire wasn't some giant camping trip. They knew how to build, govern, and grow cities like pros. Number 5. Genghis Khan died, and so did the Mongol Empire. Finally, one of the biggest myths floating around about the Mongol Empire is this idea that it collapsed the moment Genghis Khan took his last breath. Like, he dies, his horse sheds a single tear, and the entire empire just crumbles like a sandcastle at high tide. But that's not what actually happened. Sure, Genghis Khan was the mastermind, the glue that held everything together, but the empire didn't just hit self-destruct when he was gone. In fact, the Mongol Empire thrived after his death. His sons, grandsons, and other successors didn't just maintain what he built, they expanded it. The Mongols pushed further into Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Under Kublai Khan, they even conquered all of China and established the Yuan dynasty. That's not exactly what you'd call falling apart. What actually happened was more like a slow, messy breakup rather than a dramatic collapse. The empire eventually split into several khanates, think of them as Mongol sub-franchises, like the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Each of these khanates operated independently, but still shared cultural and political ties for a while. It wasn't until around the mid-14th century, roughly 100 years after Genghis Khan's death, that the empire really started losing its grip. That's when the wheels started coming off, thanks to things like internal power struggles, local uprisings, and the Black Death that devastated huge parts of their territory. So no, the Mongol Empire didn't disappear like a Snapchat story the second Genghis Khan died. It actually lingered and evolved for several generations. In fact, parts of his empire continued to exist for centuries. The Golden Horde stuck around until the 15th century, and the Yuan dynasty ruled China until the mid-13th century. And that wraps up our debunking of 5 Mongol Empire myths you probably still believed. If you learned something new, smash that like button and subscribe. Don't let these facts ride off into the sunset without you.